Hello, my name is Daniel Adibi, and I am your host for Our World 101, the show in which we discuss complicated, real world events and issues to bring people together. Today's guest is André Lee, who's a documentary filmmaker and an activist. Mr. Lee has worked on several documentaries, including The Prep School Negro, The Road to Justice, and I'm Not Racist, Am I? In addition, Mr. Lee regularly leads civil rights tours, which are trips to the South in which people can view historically significant civil rights sites and speak with locals to better understand the significance of the movement. He's also a filmmaking teacher at the Germantown Friends School and a keynote speaker. So, Mr. Lee, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to speak to you today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Daniel. I'm really honored to be here today.
Thank you. So, you've dedicated your life to anti-racist work. Can you describe your background and how your background has shaped your passion for being an activist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I grew up here in Philadelphia, and I grew up in North Philadelphia. I was born into a lower income family, and I always wanted to do something to work towards equality, and justice. And at an early age, I got a scholarship to attend Germantown Friends School. And I went there, and I was so shocked by this world that I didn't know that was not so far from where I had grown up. And my thought was, why doesn't the world know about what is available and possible for them to have? How can I help people understand and learn about the access that's in the world? So I became dedicated to bringing the concept of access to people from an early age. Before I could say anti-racism, I thought things don't feel right in the world, and I want to try and change that.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about that in your documentary, The Prep School Negro. And I watched the educational version of it, and I felt that it really shed light on what it's like, for a Black student from a lower socioeconomic background to attend an elite, predominantly white school, as you did. And I was just wondering if you could tell our viewers a little bit more about that documentary.
Yeah, when I first started out to make The Prep School Negro, I wanted to try and show my family and my friends, the church I grew up in, the people from my community, what it was like for me to be inside of Germantown Friends School. That was a whole initial idea. And I thought I would tell my story historically and then tell the story of current students at the school. But my life sort of changed as the film started, as you probably saw in it from the very beginning. And so the story went in a very different direction. It became a very personal story. And when I was making it, I wasn't sure what I was doing besides trying to tell about my experience going to a school like Germantown Friends School, and the shock of it all and the excitement of it all, and how my eyes were opened wider and wider. And then when I start taking it out and showing it to people, I remember when it first got done, it didn't get into any film festivals, got rejected from the entertainment world. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And I start showing it to people. And, I just had two screenings the past 2 or 3 weeks. And it's been a good 12 years or so. And people are still interested in the movie. And I think what happens is people see a human story. People may hear like Prep School Negro, that's nothing to do with me. But I think people watch it and go, oh, I felt like an outsider in places where I felt like I couldn't talk about what I was experiencing. And I needed to verbalize that internal dialogue. So the film is about one little boy, my little boy experience going to a private high school, being an adult, trying to reconcile some issues with my family, and then finding a way to really step forward and reach out to people that you may not know love you, that actually love you and take care of you and rebuild connections.
And I've heard in some of your previous interviews, you talk about the story of how you got into Germantown Friends School and how you figured out what happened after your mother passed away. So can you tell our viewers a little bit about that story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I went to Germantown Friends School through their summer basketball reading clinic. They still have the clinic, which is so awesome. And it's a clinic geared towards bringing local students into Germantown Friends School, local Germantown kids into the school during the summer. And it's a basketball and reading clinic. And I was horrible at basketball, but I was a really good reader. And so I excelled in one part of it. When I finished Prep School Negro, I showed it at Germantown Friends School to get their permission. I'm saying I'm representing the school. I'm taking the story out there. I wanted to know what they thought of the movie. And we all watched it and were very, very quiet afterwards. And I thought, uh-oh, they're quiet. Then I remember, well, they're Quakers are quiet. And then I said, so what'd you all think? And so it was hard for us to see, the end of your mother's life in a film because we knew her and liked her and loved her. So it was tough, but we think it's an important story. Can you tell us, since someone raised their hand and said, can you tell us how you first really learned about Germantown Friends School? And I said, well, my mother knew this guy named Stephen Rook was his name. And someone goes, oh, I know Stephen Rook. I have his desk on my car. And someone else said, yeah, he lives on the block from me. And I was like, I hadn't said that name since I was 14 or 15. And so I called him up and talked about the project. And instantly he was like, oh, Andre, you worked at Miramax, you worked at HBO. He listed my whole life career, the Ford Foundation, HBO, Diana Ross. He was talking about all stuff. And I was like, how do you know? I haven't seen you since I was 13 or 14. So he confessed my mother saw him as a therapist secretly for 8 years. And he said when she first came to school, she said, my boy needs something else. And he knew about the program. And I was like literally sitting on the couch in North Philadelphia because it was I couldn't go outside that much. It was too rough at the time. And he said, let's get this boy out of the neighborhood and get him somewhere else and doing something different. And I applied to the basketball reading clinic, and the connection to get into the school, which I think is always a funny story. I mentioned earlier that I was a horrible basketball player, but a great reader. We had a thing called the word of the day. And the way it works is there would be a scrimmage at the end of the day, every day. And at the beginning of the day, they would give a word, define it, and talk about it. It would show up in the reading that we did that day. And then during the game, they blow the whistle, stop the game, and say, okay, the first team to use the word of the day in a sentence and define it gets bonus points. So for the first time in my life, I was like a valuable team member on the basketball team. We want Andre because he'll get his bonus points, even though I may not be on the floor and pay that much. But it was so all those things just came together and brought me to Germantown Friends School.
Yeah, and the way you're describing it, Germantown Friends School seemed like an amazing opportunity for you, but you also had to deal with a reality of two different worlds. And I remember actually distinctly in your documentary, you talked about how one of the students in your school brought attention to the way that you pronounced ask. And I was wondering if you faced any other pressures or microaggressions while you were in school and how they made you feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. We didn't have the term microaggressions back then. People just got on our nerves, is what we would say. And I think that's a really important point, because I think that sometimes when we think about phrases like microaggressions and violence committed against us numerous ways, these are ways that we have to identify stuff right now. And they're not new. And we're looking at behavior that happens. And I think sometimes people are doing things against us, causing us trauma, trouble, etc., without knowing it. Because without identifying to someone that they bothered you and something happened, how are they going to know? And I think there's a phrase I've been living by lately that when I first heard it really struck me. We have to be careful not to weaponize our trauma. It's real that stuff happens to you and it's upsetting and it hurts. But what's a moment of trying to work with that person to improve, not necessarily take care of them and educate them everything, but just let somebody know what you're saying is bothering me and here's why, as opposed to I'm canceling your whole life because you said and did this. I don't think we really get as far as we could get in those moments. Sometimes it's necessary, you know what, you need to go away and learn something. And the story we're talking about is a perfect example. So that was a kid in my class named Ian. And Ian once turned to me and said, I came from North Philadelphia. I came from a Black family. I said ask. I didn't say ask. And I was like, can I ask you a question? That was the way we talked. That was the way everybody talked about the community. That's how we spoke. And I said it one day, he just turned, he goes, Andre, if you X me, I will bleed. And I was like, what? And I talked to him as an adult. And he said this to me, said, Andre, actually, I was a lower income white kid at the school. And by picking on you, I was deflecting stuff that may have come at me because I was lower income. Whether it was real, he was internalizing it. That was a moment. And that's the story where hurt people. We have to check ourselves. I wish I had the ability as a teenager to be you know what, Ian, you're yelling at me, therefore you must be in pain. What's going on? But I didn't have that ability as a teenager. You're just what? And it turns to a little bickering argument, and you're just two kids trying to figure it out. But as an adult, I can look back and go, you know what? We all come to the table with our own individual stories and experiences. And I've tried to foster a life around bringing people to that table to have that dialogue, to move forward. So that little moment, it still stays with me. And it really informed a lot of my life and experiences, because at the time I just felt like I was dumb, I was stupid, so I didn't know how to say ask properly, as opposed to being like, you know what, homeboy has issues also that are not being dealt with in this place. That is wonderful and great, but here are these little teeny tiny moments. And if you think about all those moments where you're in a fight or a push and pull or bicker with someone, sometimes if you can get to the essence of it, it can really unpack it and rebuild something else much more powerful.
Yeah, and that also stresses the importance of your film. Understanding other people's experiences is really important when you're talking to them to avoid those kind of arguments and bickerings as you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And when you meet with other students in your roundtable discussions after a screening of a film, do you feel that they are facing the same challenges and pressures that you did when you were in high school?
High school is a really hard place.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. You're trying to understand who you are. There's potential like flirting and attraction, and you got tons of homework, and you just want to get a date to prom. You want to get your math homework done. What sport am I going to play on? All the things that are just in place. A lot is happening between those years. So when moments where your experience feels amplified and more deeply scrutinized, it can become even more. You just want to like go to class, get it done, and get out of there. Not have the whole school be like, "What happened to you?" And see any little, like if you trip, it's a big deal. At the end of the day, it's not a big deal, but it feels like everything. If you like trip or fall in front of a bunch of people, it's really not that big of a deal, but it feels like a big deal. So all that said, I think that with adding in these issues around race and class and identity, whether it be through gender, through economic status, through personal choice in any kind of way, religious status, etc., when all those things come into place, if we don't have a space, a community where we can fully engage and have dialogue about what's happening for us and feel heard and valued and appreciated, that's when those moments become heightened. So I do see students still going through a lot. And the great thing about being at Germantown Friends School right now, I teach filmmaking classes, is just to be there for kids. Sometimes kids just like, "Hey, what's up?" and just want to stand and look at me. If I'm glad you're here. And I'm like, "That's cool. I'm glad I'm here too. When you're ready to talk in a month or 10 years, reach out and let me know." I had a good friend that I'm still good friends with from high school. And Germantown Friends School is a very liberal Quaker school. And this kid was at the time the one Republican. And we used to joke, he's like, "Andre, I'm the real minority at GFS. I'm a Republican." And that was our like laughing kind of conversation. And so much of our conversation to this day starts with, "I love you, man, but," we're still great buddies. We're still good friends. I know his kids. One of his sons is in college now and sends me cuts of his movie he's working on that I've known since he was like 3 years old. Now he's a big kid in college, which is amazing. And that relationship is in place because we both come to the table with our individual truths, and we don't dismiss the other and say, "You're just wrong, go away." We say, "I want to understand your perspective. I don't get it. It seems crazy to me, but I still want to understand it and have a conversation and dialogue and move forward." So I really think that's how we get forward. So what I try and encourage students to do that are facing these moments where they feel outside, excluded, is how can you really, this is a phrase I love, verbalize that internal dialogue and come to the table with your experiences, the conversations, and move forward in a positive and good way. Because it's a lifelong journey to search for identity.
Yeah. And speaking of having conversations and dialogue, in your film, "I'm Not Racist, Am I?", you follow 12 high school students as they have difficult conversations about race and racism. Can you describe that film in a little bit more detail for our viewers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a film that we made through the Calhoun School in New York City as a private school with a teacher there who at a late age in life discovered the concept of race as a social construct, and also racism as not individual meanness, but structural racism. And he was kind of like embarrassed that like in his late 50s, like, "I'm just getting this. Why aren't teenagers talking about this? If they can start talking about this, how can we change the world and fix the problem that is racism?" And so he worked hard to raise money and wanted to make a curriculum that goes along with this program, but he wanted to make a movie also. And so he approached our company. Our company applied for it. I was a producer on it. Catherine Wigginton Green, she was a director on it. And our idea was let's just get kids in facilitated spaces having conversations about race and racism. What does it mean? How they talk about it? How they define it? You know, the opening of the film is like, we ask the question, well, how do you define racism? And all the kids are like, because it's hard to define. And I think the success of racism, the fact that it is hard to define. So we followed 12 kids for about two academic years, like 1 year and 2 summers, probably, just taking them through facilitated workshops. And note that I say facilitated. We had professionals, people who cared about it, who knew how to talk to teens about the stuff. They didn't just haphazardly do it. And so they took them through various exercises. And the way we found the kids, which was important also. Like, we didn't go out saying, let's find a young racist white boy. We didn't say that. We said, let's find 12 kids who are interested in talking about these conversations. And also their families would show up just as equally as the children. So we didn't want just the kids, we wanted their families to be involved in the story also. So it follows them going through trying to understand and define what racism is. And more importantly, actually talk amongst themselves to each other about what they're learning, experiencing, and challenging the world with their new perspectives.
And you mentioned how you had a discussion on how to define racism. What other conversations can we have in schools or even at home to discuss racism?
Yeah, I think, racism likes that we're afraid to talk about it. Racism likes that it's confusing. Racism likes that people get up in arms and storm the Capitol. Racism likes that. I think that we have to find a way, because this is something that affects everybody. This isn't a problem just for people of color. This is a problem that we have in our country that's as old as the country. We think about laws that were in place to keep us divided, to keep us from having conversations. If racism was successful, you and I wouldn't be in this conversation because they want us to be separated and not even talking about it. So I think that what folks can do is, it's important, one, to bring in people to understand these concepts and ideas and facilitate the dialogue. It's important to admit and acknowledge you're going to make mistakes as you have the conversation. And also it's important to acknowledge that it's like so deep and ingrained into our society that we have to accept that. I know people get very fearful, like, I don't want to talk because I don't want to sound racist or bad or terrible. And that is actually just helping the problem go forward. You got to step forward and go, I'm going to make a mistake, but this is what I think. And then people who they're talking to have to go, you made a mistake, and let's keep talking. Not just, I can't do this, is too much, and cut folks off. I think that we got to roll our sleeves up and try and understand what it means to be better to one another. We have laws and programs in this country defined to keep us apart and to keep some people in power and keep some folks from having power. And that actually cuts across racial lines, and actually is, I think, more ingrained in class lines, because folks with the power like that folks who don't have the power are fighting amongst ourselves about what's happening, as opposed to be like, wait a minute, we all should have access to these things and should have the ability to move forward. And often, sometimes when people become fearful of talking about racism, they worry that it's a zero-sum game. So if I admit that there's racism in the world, that means I'm going to lose something. And I tell people, we're not trying to cut your house in half and give it to someone. We're saying that some people have systemically been denied from the same access you have had. What would it look like if they had the same access you had? So the reason why I like talking to teens is, I think, so when you grow up and you are a doctor, teacher, lawyer, parent, you're the bank officer giving out a loan, you really can make decisions in life that are about who the person is, not the preconceived notions and biases that you have in your heart and your mind.
Yeah. And I also want to talk a little bit about your other film, The Road to Justice, in which you follow a group of Black middle school students and also a group of primarily white older people as they tour historical civil rights sites. Can you describe some of the specific sites you visited and the significance of each of them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I thought about this today, and I knew you would ask this question, so I wore a sweatshirt from one of the spots in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's called the Four-Way Soul Food Restaurant. It's in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's around the corner from the Stax Record company, which is where Isaac Hayes and all the funk from the South and so much good music was made and created. And on our tour, I'm the thought leader on the tour with the Nation magazine. It's called The Road to Freedom, the tour itself. And what I do is I'm the helping people think about the concept place they're going to and there to pull people aside and talk about it. I give presentations before we visit places, and then afterwards we actually visit with people who are of the South who give the actual tours. So we visit some incredible places. We go to Little Rock, Arkansas, and meet with one of the original Little Rock Nine, Elizabeth Eckford. We sit with her. If you look at the picture, Little Rock Nine is a young girl holding her books, and has on shades and a pretty white dress, and there's a crowd behind her yelling. We sit with her and have a conversation with her about what that day was like and what she wants people to do. And the note she gives in the movie is that we can't have true reconciliation without doing this, without having these conversations. We go walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which marked the march from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights. We visit all throughout the South, and food and music are a big part of it because those both helped the movement happen. We think about civil rights movement, we hear about MLK, which is important, but there are also a whole lot of people who are working with him, next to him, under him, around him to make it happen. And half the time, there were women who were cooking and raising lots and lots of money. There's a woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who practically funded the boycott with making food. It's incredible when you think about that, because these major movements take a lot of work. So this trip throughout the South, we so in Jackson, Mississippi, make our way over to Montgomery, Alabama, and end there. And I'll finish by saying one of my last favorite places that is an outgrowth of the experience that's newish and is still growing. My friend Michelle Browder runs a installation called The Mothers of Gynecology. And what she's done is the man who is considered father of gynecology, who invented a lot of the practices, he practiced on women without using any anesthesiology, and it was pretty violent and terrible. And so the world was like, tear a statue down, get rid of him. And she goes, I hear that, but let's also do this. So she built this monument to the women that were enslaved and suffered under him. And you can go there and see these huge 25 feet high metal statues that she built that are honoring the women that suffered. And the whole idea is, what does it mean to reclaim the story? And that's towards the end of the trip. When you think about touring the South and civil rights and the like, it's great to end on that, which is like something someone's doing today. We also visit with EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. All in all, the whole trip overall is just phenomenal. It's life-changing. I think everyone should make a pilgrimage to the South. It is here in our Americas, and understand who we are a little more deeply through a trip like this.
And how does, in the movie, when you follow the two different groups, how does seeing these significant historical sites from the two different perspectives enhance a mutual understanding of the hardships of the civil rights movement?
It's funny. I love saying this, that people ask me, what's it like to take junior high school students and take retired senior citizens on a trip? I was like, on the bus is the exact same thing. It's too cold. It's too hot. I'm hungry. Are we there? Like, they all say the same thing on the bus. But in terms of the experience, on both, there are lots of like, aha, surprise, I didn't know that moments. And for young people, there's a little bit of like, that wasn't that long ago. And why did this happen? And there's lots of exploration of why this happened. For a lot of adults that are on a trip, based on the groups that have been going with me, a lot of them think, why didn't I do more? Or I've had people, I had an older man who hadn't been back in Montgomery, Alabama since he was there protesting. And we were standing in front of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, which is the church MLK led during the boycott. And he just broke down and cried because he was like, it's so intense to be here. I had a 94-year-old woman who moved slow on the whole trip, but she was determined to walk across the Evan Pettus Bridge, which is like a little over a mile. And she did it. She got her walker out because she said, I never did this as a teenager. And now's my time to come back and do this in honor and legacy. So what happens is there's lots of personal internal growth from each person. And then in our facilitated conversations, our moments, you really see people coming together, transformed and energized about what to do. I'll finish with sharing one last story in terms of the different things we have. Is we visited a woman named Miss Annie Pearl. And Miss Annie Pearl, she's 80-something, and every election, she's on the foot of the Evan Pettus Bridge with a sign that says, vote or die. You know, when she was a little girl during the march from Montgomery to Alabama she was a little girl during the march from Selma to Montgomery, working on the bridge, like picking up stuff behind. The kids didn't march so much, but they were behind and to be safe. And so she remembers the day. She was there that first day when the attack happened. And so she's committed her whole life to fighting for right and justice. She runs a little museum down there. And when folks say, well, what can I do when I go home? And she's like, I'm 80-something and I still get arrested for protesting. I go and I find something I know that's not right, and I do my best to interrupt it and call for justice and equity because I believe that we can have this. So it's just powerful to see all ages transformed. And just because you're 60, 70 does not mean it's too late to do something. You can do something, whether it means talking to your grandkid or actually volunteering and protesting and showing up somewhere. I think anything between any and all things between those two spaces is the work that we need. Not everyone has to be a filmmaker or marching, getting arrested like Miss Annie Pearl. Interrupt your like nephew, cousin, aunt, uncle, sister, brother, church member, etc., and say, hey, we can make this world different and better.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are really powerful words. Thank you for sharing that. Just before we wrap up our discussion, what can educators do in our school system, and what do you think parents can do at home to promote inclusivity and a better understanding of race?
Mm-hmm. I think, that's a good question. And I think a lot of my answers are wrapped up in what I've talked about today in terms of having deep, honest, real serious conversations. Read, look at documentaries, work to understand it. The stuff may feel opaque and mysterious and strange and weird, but there's a lot of research and history connected to it. Like for Prep School Negro, I talked about feeling like I was in two different worlds. That's not a concept I made up. W. Du Bois first presented that. I'm sure folks before him even talked about it, but he was the first person to actually write it down and say, hey, we have a dual consciousness as African Americans in this country. We are these formerly enslaved people. We're also folks expected to step up and participate in society equally all at once. And it's just a lot. And I'll actually say this. I think you, Daniel, are a living example of this work. You're doing this show as a teenager, and it's amazing. I've listened to the episodes you've done. I think parents and adults, administrators can look at you and say, this kid is stepping forward and asking hard questions. He doesn't try and fix and answer everything, but he's saying, you know what? I want to explore these, provide a platform, and get people thinking. I mean, I give you big props because when I first got the email, I was like, I don't have time, but I'm going to do this. So let's make it happen. So I think that you are the living example of what we need to do to fix and turn these things around.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks again for, coming on the show. And I know you're very busy, so thank you for finding the time to meet with me.
Please, my pleasure. I took a snapshot of our little Zoom, and I'm going to, put it up on social media because I think it's so awesome.
Yeah. I really enjoyed speaking to you today. I think, you really, you provide a lot of insight into a lot of issues that we face in our country right now. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thanks. To all our viewers, I hope you'll join us for our next episode. I'm Daniel Adibi, and I'll see you soon.